There is a specific kind of person. You may be one of them, or you may have spent your life trying to understand one, who walks into a room and notices things that the room has not announced. They register the specific quality of tension in a social exchange that everyone else is treating as normal. They see the inconsistency between what someone is saying and what their body is doing 3 seconds before the inconsistency resolves itself in any way that would be legible to most observers. They hear the particular frequency of a reassurance that is performing warmth rather than feeling it, and they register it in the same automatic, effortless way that other people register the weather. They are the people who read the subtext before the text has finished arriving, who track the dynamics of a room the way a chess player tracks the board, not as an effort, not as a strategy, but as the simple, unavoidable, deeply exhausting consequence of a mind that processes social and psychological information at a resolution that most people's minds simply do not access. And if you are that person, or if you have loved one, you know that this quality, which from the outside might look like social intelligence or perceptiveness or unusual wisdom about human nature, is experienced from the inside as something considerably more complicated than any of those descriptions suggests. Because seeing too much is not a superpower in the sense that word implies unlimited advantage with no cost. It is a specific kind of cognitive architecture that comes with genuine gifts and genuine burdens in equal and inextricable measure. The gift of being almost impossible to deceive by anyone paying attention to the person doing the deceiving, and the burden of being almost unable to stop seeing the deception even in the people, in the moments where you genuinely wish you could not. The Polish psychiatrist Kazimierz Dabrowski spent decades studying gifted and highly intelligent individuals and identified what he called overexcitabilities, the specific, documented tendency of the high IQ mind to process stimuli at a higher intensity and at greater depth than the population mean, not only intellectually, but sensorially, emotionally, imaginationally, and interpersonally. What Dabrowski found was not that the gifted perceive more because they are trying to. They perceive more because the perceptual apparatus is calibrated differently, is running at a different resolution, and cannot simply be turned down because the resolution is inconvenient. Today on Quiet Power, we go into the specific psychology of the people who see too much, what the neuroscience and clinical research actually says about how their minds are built differently, what the specific costs of the architecture are that most accounts of high intelligence conveniently omit, and what the specific gifts of living at this level of perception actually are when they are understood accurately, rather than romanticized into something they are not. This is Quiet Power, where we bring the precision of the best available psychology and neuroscience to the experiences that most people who are living inside them have never seen mapped with accuracy. If you have spent your life being told you think too much, feel too deeply, notice too many things that nobody else seems to notice, this channel is building the most complete and most honest map of that experience available anywhere. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what you are about to understand about your own cognitive architecture is not only deeply clarifying, it will fundamentally change how you relate to what you have always understood as the most demanding and most isolating part of how your mind works. The first thing to understand about the psychology of people who see too much is what is actually happening in their brains at the architectural level, not as a metaphor, not as a flattering narrative about exceptional sensitivity, but as a specific and well-documented neurological reality that the research on high IQ cognitive processing has been mapping with increasing precision over the last several decades. The neuroscience of high intelligence reveals a brain that is, in several measurable ways, differently organized from the average IQ brain, not simply faster at standard cognitive operations, but genuinely different in how it allocates and distributes neural activity, how many associations it forms automatically from a single input, and how broadly it scans the available information in any environment before settling into a response. The research on neural efficiency, first explored systematically by Richard Heyer in the 1980s, and extended by subsequent decades of brain imaging studies, found, counterintuitively, that highly intelligent brains tend to show less overall brain activity when solving standard problems, not more, because the neural pathways between relevant areas are more efficient and more precisely targeted. But this efficiency in focused problem solving coexists with a different phenomenon in social and environmental processing: a broader and more comprehensive scanning of available information, a tendency to recruit more neural regions and draw more associations from a single social input, and a pattern recognition system that updates faster and draws from a larger stored model of human behavioral patterns than the average IQ system does. The research team of Lavin Collot, Planche, and Wever Dauret, whose 2025 Review in Cognitive Neuroscience examined the relationship between high intellectual potential and socio-emotional processing, identified what they called a dominance of cognitive empathy over emotional empathy in highly intelligent individuals. The capacity to understand precisely what another person is experiencing intellectually, to decode their behavioral and micro-expressive signals with exceptional accuracy, while remaining somewhat more effectively detached from the emotional content of what has been decoded. This is the specific architecture of the person who sees too much. They do not experience more emotion than the average person necessarily, but they process social and emotional information at a much higher resolution, which means they perceive more of it, decode more of it, and carry the cognitive load of having perceived and decoded it, whether or not the situation warrants that level of engagement. The overexcitability framework that Dabrowski developed, which the 2017 research of Karpinski and colleagues published in Intelligence, confirmed with large sample data, identifies 5 domains in which highly intelligent individuals show elevated processing intensity: psychomotor, sensory, intellectual, imaginational, and emotional overexcitability, each of which represents the same fundamental phenomenon in a different modality. The system is running hotter, receiving more, processing at greater depth, and generating more internal response to what it receives than the average functioning system generates for the same input. The specific cost of this architecture, the cost that is almost never discussed in the popular accounts of high intelligence, that prefer the flattering narrative, is what the research on high IQ populations consistently documents as the hyperbrain, hyperbody response. The same heightened processing that makes the system so perceptive also makes it more reactive to the accumulated load of what it has perceived, more prone to the specific psychological challenges of perfectionism, existential anxiety, and the particular isolation of a person who cannot stop seeing what they see, even when seeing it is genuinely painful. The second layer addresses the specific social and relational experience of living with this architecture, the particular texture of what it is like to be, day to day, the person whose social processing runs at a resolution that most of the people around them are not running at, and why this produces the specific combination of gifts and costs that the clinical literature on giftedness has documented consistently across decades of observation. The most immediately recognizable feature of the high IQ social experience is the one that is both its most significant gift and its most persistent source of isolation: the pattern recognition system. Over time, the highly intelligent person builds an extraordinarily detailed internal model of human behavioral patterns, a model that has been updated by thousands of observations, refined by the automatic association making of a brain that connects new inputs to stored patterns faster and more comprehensively than average, and calibrated by the kind of sustained, deep attention to the specifics of human behavior that most people do not direct at social interactions, because their processing systems do not require or reward that level of engagement. The result of this model building is an intuition about people that is, in functional terms, actually fast pattern analysis operating below the threshold of conscious deliberation. The feeling of knowing something about a person or a dynamic before you can explain why you know it is the experiential signature of a pattern recognition system, completing its analysis faster than the language centers can articulate the conclusion. This is the specific gift, the capacity to read situations and people with a precision and a speed that consistently exceeds what explicit reasoning could produce in the same time frame, providing genuine navigational advantage in complex social environments and genuine protection against the most common forms of manipulation and deception. But the same model, built from the same sustained attention to human behavioral patterns, produces what the research literature on high intelligence and anxiety consistently identifies as the characteristic cognitive burden of the high IQ mind: the inability to stop running the analysis, even in situations where the analysis is not needed, not helpful, and actively counterproductive to the quality of experience the person is trying to have. The person who cannot stop reading between the lines cannot choose to simply hear the lines. The person who automatically tracks the inconsistencies between what someone is saying and what their body is communicating cannot choose to simply receive the saying. The person who has built a comprehensive model of human behavioral patterns cannot choose to not notice when the behavior in front of them matches a pattern the model has learned to associate with specific, usually adverse, outcomes. This is what the clinical literature on gifted adults who have never been told what they are describes as the specific exhaustion that those adults most consistently report. Not the exhaustion of doing too much or working too hard, but the exhaustion of perceiving too much and being unable to stop, of running a high-bandwidth processing system continuously at full capacity in social environments that most people inhabit at a fraction of that bandwidth, and of carrying the accumulated weight of everything the system has perceived and processed and concluded and stored without adequate context for understanding why the perceiving is so relentless or what it means about who they are. The asynchronous development concept, the recognition that in gifted individuals' cognitive development significantly outpaces social and emotional development, producing a specific mismatch between intellectual capacity and the social and emotional maturity required to navigate what that capacity reveals, describes the specific developmental experience of many high IQ individuals who arrived at adult levels of social and psychological insight while still inhabiting the body and the relational resources of a child, and who spent years or decades attempting to integrate what they could see with what they were equipped to do about it. The third layer maps the specific gifts that live on the other side of the architecture's costs, not the flattering popular narrative of genius as pure advantage, but the genuine and specific ways in which the capacity to see too much, when it is understood and developed, rather than pathologized or suppressed, produces qualities of mind and relationship that are genuinely irreplaceable and genuinely worth the price the architecture charges for them. The first of these gifts is the one that is hardest to name and most important to understand accurately: the specific quality of presence that a high IQ person brings to a genuine connection when they have found the rare person who receives that level of attention without being destabilized by it. The pattern recognition system that makes the high IQ person so exhausting to be around for people whose presentations are not fully congruent with their interiors. The system that reads the inconsistency, tracks the performance, detects the managed impression, is the same system that, turned toward someone whose interior and exterior are genuinely aligned, produces a quality of being known that most people never experience in any relationship. The person who has seen this accurately, whose subtleties and depths are registered by a system that genuinely has the capacity to hold them, experiences a form of recognition that is qualitatively different from the ordinary social experience of being liked or valued. It is the experience of being actually, specifically, comprehensively seen, and it is, for the people who have had it, one of the most significant relational experiences available. The second gift is the specific quality of thinking that the overexcitability framework produces, the intellectual overexcitability in Dabrowski's taxonomy that manifests as an insatiable drive toward depth and complexity and connection-making that most people's minds do not demand of themselves, a capacity for the kind of sustained, integrative, multi-level thinking that produces genuine insight rather than mere knowledge accumulation. The research on pattern recognition and creative cognition particularly the work on remote association and divergent thinking that has consistently found positive correlations with higher IQ, identifies the high IQ brain's tendency to form associations across wider conceptual distances, to hold more variables in working memory simultaneously, and to identify structural similarities between apparently dissimilar domains as the specific cognitive operations that produce what we experience from the outside as insight, wisdom, or the capacity to understand something that others find genuinely difficult. The third gift is the one that Dabrowski himself identified as the highest potential of the overexcitable mind, the capacity for what he called positive disintegration, the specific psychological process in which the high IQ individual's perception of the gap between what is and what ought to be becomes the generative force of genuine moral and personal development, driving them toward the kind of sustained self-examination and genuine growth that the person who does not perceive the gap at the same resolution simply does not feel compelled to pursue. The gifted adult who has understood their own architecture, who has found the framework that names what they are experiencing, and has stopped pathologizing the perception as a defect, is often, in Dabrowski's clinical observation, the person most capable of the kind of development that produces genuine moral seriousness, genuine compassion, grounded in real comprehension of what people are going through, and the specific quality of integrity that belongs to someone who cannot stop seeing the distance between what they are and what they are capable of becoming. The fourth layer, the one that determines what this entire understanding means for the person who recognizes themselves in it, addresses the specific question that the previous three layers make inevitable. Given what we now understand about the architecture of the high IQ mind, given its genuine costs and its genuine gifts in equal and inextricable measure, what does the person who sees too much actually do with that understanding? And what specifically changes when the architecture is named accurately, rather than experienced as a formless burden? The first and most immediately significant change is the specific shift in self-interpretation that accurate naming produces. The shift from the framework of pathology, which most highly intelligent people encounter first and encounter most frequently, to the framework of architecture, which is both more accurate and more useful. A person who has been told their entire life that they think too much, feel too intensely, notice things that other people do not notice, and that do not exist in the ways they are noticing them, has been offered an interpretive frame that pathologizes accurate perception by attributing it to malfunction, to anxiety, to overthinking, to a failure of the social calibration that normal people manage effortlessly. What Dabrowski's overexcitability research, the high IQ neuroscience literature, and the clinical work on gifted adults converge in establishing is that this frame is wrong at the foundational level. The perception is accurate. The system is not malfunctioning. The architecture is different from the average architecture, rather than defective relative to it. And the costs the architecture produces are not symptoms of a problem that needs to be fixed, but the natural consequences of a processing system that is, in several specific and documentable ways, doing more than most processing systems do. The second change that accurate understanding produces is the specific recalibration of social expectations that transforms the high IQ person's relationship to their own isolation. The research finding that is most consistently reported across clinical populations of gifted adults, finding that the pool of people with whom genuine intellectual and social compatibility is possible is genuinely smaller for someone at the high end of the IQ distribution than it is for someone at the mean, is not a comfortable finding, but it is a liberating one when it replaces the framework of social failure that most gifted adults have been operating under. The small social circle is not evidence of social inability. It is a direct consequence of having standards for genuine connection that most social environments cannot meet. And the person who understands this is no longer interpreting their unchosen solitude as confirmation of their unworthiness, but as the accurate description of a compatibility gap that exists whether or not they have been told about it. The third and most important change is the one that Kazimierz Dabrowski's entire life's work was pointing toward. The transformation of the overexcitabilities from burdens that must be managed into the specific raw material of the most significant development available to the human mind. The person who sees too much is the person who is most continuously confronted with the gap between what is and what could be, between the person they are presenting to the world and the person they are capable of being, between the social world as it currently operates and the social world that their perception tells them it is capable of becoming. This confrontation is not comfortable, but it is, in Dabrowski's clinical observation across decades of work with gifted and highly intelligent adults, the specific confrontation that produces the kind of development genuine, irreversible, organized around increasing authenticity and increasing depth rather than increasing comfort, that most people never undertake, because they are never forced to by the relentless pressure of a mind that cannot stop seeing what it sees. The person who sees too much does not need to learn to see less. They need to learn what seeing this much is for, and the answer, when they find it, is always the same. It is the instrument of a becoming that the less perceptive mind simply does not have the resolution to pursue. Here is what I want you to carry from this video, wherever you are in your own recognition of what kind of mind you are carrying. The exhaustion you feel in social environments that most people seem to navigate without effort is not a weakness. The inability to stop seeing the subtexts and the patterns and the distances between what people present and what they actually are is not a malfunction. The small circle, the difficulty finding genuine peers, the specific loneliness of perceiving at a resolution that the people around you are not perceiving at. None of these are evidence of your deficiency. They are the documented, consistent, well-researched consequences of a cognitive architecture that is doing more than most architectures do, that is processing more than most systems process, and that pays a specific and genuine price for the specific and genuine gifts that the processing produces. The work is not to see less. It is to build the interior stability that makes the seeing sustainable, the capacity to hold what you perceive without being governed by all of it, to use what the architecture gives you without being exhausted by everything the architecture costs. And the most important first step of that work is exactly what this video is: the naming. Because you cannot build a relationship with an architecture you believe is a defect. You can only build a relationship with something you understand accurately, which is why the person who finally finds the right framework for what they are, not sensitive as a euphemism for broken, not overthinking as a description of malfunction, but overexcitable in the precise clinical sense of a system that processes at a higher intensity and at greater depth than the average, often reports the experience of that naming as the first genuinely free breath they have taken in a very long time. This is quiet power. Subscribe if this video has given you the framework you did not have before. Share it with one person in your life who has always seemed to see more than the room acknowledged, because recognition is the beginning of the only kind of development that is worth having. And leave your answer in the comments. What is the specific thing you have always seen that no one else seemed to see? And what has it cost you? And what has it given you? Until the next one, see clearly, name accurately, and know that the architecture you are carrying is not the problem. It is the instrument.